Okay, so in this video we're going to be looking at how the market gets back to equilibrium after a shift in supply. So there are two ways that supply can shift. It can shift to the right or it can shift to the left. And in our first example we're going to look at a supply curve shifting to the left. So it's moved from S to S1. In this instance we don't actually have the actual quantities and prices, but we'll work with what we've got. So the old equilibrium is at this point here. But at the price of P, let's say this was $5, say we were selling, I don't know, CDs. At the old price P of $5, here we now have supply has moved to here. At any given price now suppliers are less willing to supply the product. So at a price of P, $5, demand is still at this point here, demand hasn't changed because nothing's impacted. So say we've had a cyclone. Doesn't mean if we keep prices for bananas at $5 a kilo, okay, we're back to bananas now, forget it. At $5 a kilo, that isn't going to change demand. So demand's still here. But supply, because we've had the cyclone, has been reduced to here. We're less able to produce now. And therefore, we have, in here, is a surplus. We have a shortage. We have demand here, and we have supply here. We've got a shortage, which obviously, if we have a cyclone, is what's going to occur. So we have a shortage. How do we get rid of a shortage? Well, we raise the price. We raise the price from P to P1. So we have a shortage, we raise the price, and this causes two things. It causes an expansion in supply. And what I mean by that is that self-interested producers then go, well, hang on a second, if prices are now higher for bananas, I'm going to shift more resources into that industry. Because we've had the initial impact of the cyclone destroying crops, which has reduced the level of supply, but now the price has increased. Some people in Victoria might go, well, I was growing apples, but I can make more money growing bananas. So it's going to cause, the higher price will cause an expansion in supply, and this higher price will also cause a contraction in demand. So back when 2011, when Cyclone Yasi hit, only the rich kids could afford bananas. The higher price caused a contraction in demand because some people couldn't afford the higher prices. So the supply curve shifting to the left has caused a higher equilibrium price, P1, and a lower equilibrium quantity. Okay. So here's a table showing the same thing. So the old equilibrium was here. We had, at a price of $5 per kilo, we had supply of 800 and demand of 800. Then we have the cyclone, bang! Supply has been reduced from 800 to 600, and we have a shortage of 200. How do we get rid of a shortage? We raise the price. So we raise the price from $5 to $6. And that has two impacts. One, some suppliers are going to go, well, now I'm going to supply more. Self-interested, profit-maximising suppliers shift their resources into bananas. And supply increases from 600 to 700, and demand contracts from 800 to 700 because it is less affordable. And we arrive at the new equilibrium here at a price of $6 instead of $5, and a lower equilibrium quantity traded of 700 instead of 800. And to go through that again, there's a shortage at the old equilibrium price of $5 per kilo of 200 bananas. Suppliers increase the price to $6 because they've got a shortage and they want to maximise their profits. This leads to a contraction in demand because people can't afford the higher price. And it also leads to an expansion in the supply curve because self-interested producers will shift their resources into areas where they can get a higher price. So we arrive at a new equilibrium at $6 per kilo, a dollar higher, and a quantity of 600 units. Okay, and the old equilibrium quantity was 800. My apologies, we end up at a new equilibrium of 700. That should say 700 there, my apologies. So the new equilibrium is 700 units, where the old equilibrium was 800 units. I won't change that because that's what happens when you make a lot of videos. Here's another question. Explain how lower production costs will impact the equilibrium price and quantity. So this is similar to the exercise that you just did. Lower production costs shift the supply curve to the right. There's more of an incentive to supply due to higher profits. This causes a surplus of supply at the current market price. How do we get rid of a surplus? We decrease prices. And this will lead to an expansion in demand, or it'll attract more demand, and a contraction in supply because there's less of an incentive to produce. Or we will shift resources to other productive areas once the product price goes down. And therefore we will end up at a lower equilibrium price and a higher equilibrium quantity traded because of the lower production costs. So we may be producing cheesecake and the price of cheese has gone down. That's led to a lower equilibrium price and a higher equilibrium quantity traded. This table is critically important. You need to be aware of what each shift does to both price and quantity. And the best way to answer these questions is to draw the curves. But if demand shifts to the right, we'll end up with a higher price and higher quantity. If demand shifts to the left, the new equilibrium will be at a lower price and lower quantity. If supply shifts right, so lower production costs or more profitability, it'll lead to lower prices but a higher quantity. And if supply shifts left, for example, your cyclone or your natural disaster, we'll end up with a higher price and lower quantity. So you need to be able to look at questions and go, which curve is shifting and how will that impact on both price and quantity? Other thing to be mindful of, and this would be a particularly difficult question, but you need to be able to draw the curves and work out which of different options are going to cause the expansion or contraction in demand. So if there's a shift right in demand, that's actually going to cause an expansion in supply, because the shift right in demand will cause a shortage, which will cause a higher price, and then the supply will expand. If there's a shift right in supply, that will lead to a lower price, and eventually it will lead to an expansion in demand. If there's a shift left in supply, like the cyclone, prices are going to increase, and that will eventually lead to a contraction in demand. And if demand curve shifts to the left, that's going to lead to lower prices and will lead to a contraction in supply. So an example of that would be if there's an increase in consumer confidence. That's going to lead to a demand curve shifting to the right and will end up leading to a higher price and an expansion in supply. And decrease in production costs will cause lower prices and will cause an expansion in demand. To sum up, a shift in the demand will cause an expansion in supply due to the higher price. A shift in the demand to the left will cause a contraction in supply because of the lower price. A shift in supply to the right will lead to an expansion in demand because of the lower price. And a shift in the supply to the left will cause a contraction in demand due to the higher price. Thank you for listening.